working in a variety of settings, including a pediatric registry, state and central registries, and an NCI designated comprehensive cancer center program at a Metro Atlanta hospital. So welcome, Kim.
Thank you. Can you see my screen? Because I just saw that the green changed a little bit. Can you see my slides?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. All right, let me get started. Let's see, I'll be discussing today strategies to avoid common abstracting errors. So to best approach abstracting in our current working environment, I'll be focusing on the following areas: efficient tactics for using our available manuals and resources, best practices for text documentation, and defining and ensuring high quality cancer data. So at the conclusion of our talk, we should be able to approach abstracting in a more efficient and accurate manner. Here we see a list of the most essential manuals and resources for abstracting. These are the basic materials recommended by the COC in the preface of the STORE manual. I should mention that for those listening who abstract for a SEER state, the SEER program encoding manual should also be considered an essential resource. Working outside the abstracting process to familiarize ourselves with these tools is essential for our success. To help us in our abstracting journey, we should be aware of resources other than the obvious cancer registry manuals. So let's take a look. NACER and NCRA have some tools to make sense of our manuals and resources. NACER's website gives us access to such materials as the approved abbreviation list and a required status table. More on those tools in a few minutes. We also recommend visiting NCRA's Center for Registry Education website. There you can find many learning PowerPoint videos for each manual, along with site-specific scenarios. So now let's review NACER's resources in more depth. We can see on this slide the NACER homepage contains the Central Registry Standards tab. When we navigate to this tab, we'll find the Data Standards and Data Dictionary section. Here we'll find a variety of tools helpful for hospital registrars, such as the required status table, implementation timeline for upcoming or recent changes, a data dictionary, which is much like a procedure manual, and the approved abbreviation list. And there's much more. As we know, there's the grade manual and the SSDI manual. In general, this section can help us gain a better understanding of data item history and the cancer registry standard setters that require them. Now here's a screenshot of NACER's current required status table. In the previous slide, I showed you where you could access the required status table. So if we clicked on that link, we would see this screen come up. And here on the left side, we see the key, which defines each letter by providing a status for it. So what we mean by status is whether a data item is required and by which standard setter for the current collection year. So we see on the top of our slide, there are blue headings with yellow font, and each standard setter has its own column. So for example, if we're a COC hospital in a SEER state like Georgia, if we're in Georgia, we would pay particular attention to those columns to determine which data items are required for any given diagnosis year. And we can do this by accessing the current version, but the current version that shows up by default right now is 21, which is for the new diagnosis year. So we'd have to toggle back and look at older versions for what we're currently working with, and we can easily do that. All right, as mentioned briefly on the previous slide, NACER's website contains an approved abbreviation list. Using this list is a requirement when abbreviating in our abstract. Abbreviating helps conserve space and also allows us to paint a more concise patient's summary. We all need to understand the meaning behind abbreviations used in the abstract, since there's a lot of people that look at our text. So using NACER's standard list is a good practice to get in the habit of. NCRA's informational abstracts, which are often referred to as IAs, are also a great resource for text examples. You can find the site-specific IAs on NACER's Center for Cancer Registry Education under Registry Resources. The website link is listed on this slide. It's also good practice to adhere to text requirements for the state cancer registry you report to. So state manuals should provide us with detailed and customized requirements and preferences. And finally, let's not forget the hospital or outpatient facility we provide the abstracted work for. So we should look for any cancer committee specific preferences to consider and explore the facility's policy procedure manual. On the next slide, let's look at some resources for AJCC TNM staging. When assigning TNM stage, our natural tendency is to go directly to the disease chapter for the site we're abstracting. However, it would benefit us to work with the first chapter of the 8th edition because ambiguities have been clarified for the registry audience there. Chapter 1 also introduces us to the basic components and classifications of AJCC like T and N suffix and clinical, pathological, and post-therapy classifications. Essentially, starting with Chapter 1 will help with difficult cases or for the novice CTR. Now, as far as website resources, the AJCC offers cancerstaging.org, and which is pictured here on the right. There you can find information on updates as well as educational webinars designed for the cancer registrar. In our current abstracting atmosphere, how can we be as efficient as possible while still maintaining accuracy? Well, first things first, we need to consider the best ways to navigate our manuals and resources. Let's take a closer look. We should recognize most of the cancer registry manuals follow the same general format. Understanding this formula of sorts will help us locate information quickly and efficiently. Common sections include the table of contents with a preface or foreword. This introductory section normally provides background information on how and why the manual was created. Around the same initial pages of a manual, there will most likely be a summary of changes provided. This is especially important during a big transition year like 2018. Then we most often see the general instructions. These are usually all-encompassing principles. We can think of them as a user manual because step-by-step instructions are usually given for proper use. Then we normally encounter the body of the manual. This section includes more detailed instructions for data items we need to collect. And finally, there are often appendices at the conclusion of most manuals, and these provide sets of site-specific instructions like surgery codes or county, country, and state codes. Now let's consider how best to work with the coding instructions within our manuals. Start with the basics. That is, start with the descriptions when reading a coding instruction, especially for key data items. This will help us understand the purpose behind each required data item. Knowing the reason why a data item was created can help us better capture information for its intended use. See, we may tend to read only part of a rule or instruction because time is often limited and we're under a productivity quota. However, not reading the entire set of instructions can cause misinterpretations. So take a deep breath, give yourself time outside of the abstracting process to fully learn and comprehend key data items. Follow these steps. Define the data item, understand the purpose behind collecting that data item, and read the entire instruction from beginning to end. Here we're looking at part of an instruction for lymphovascular invasion from the STORE manual. It seems fairly straightforward, right? For neoadjuvant patients, we're instructed to refer to this table. However, there's a second sentence in the same coding instruction we overlooked. Here it is in pink. It tells us to disregard the table if information in the medical record conflicts with the table. We're told to code LVI from the medical record documentation in a case like that. So disregarding the table data may occur if we don't have access to a pathology report and where we have to rely on the treating physician's documentation in the medical record. Though this may not occur very often, this is an example of how the rules for collecting LVI can be misinterpreted by not reading the entire entry. Now let's look at another LVI coding instruction, which is number 2A in STORE. It tells us when to use code 0. A common mistake we make is miscoding in situ tumors to code 9. for lymphovascular invasion, but the instruction for item 2A states use code 0 for purely in situ carcinoma, since these tumors have no biological access to the lymphatic or vascular channels. So let's look at an example. We have a melanoma, which was wide excision was performed, and the pathology report shows melanoma in situ with no evidence of invasive melanoma. The pathology report contains no line for the lymphovascular invasion status information within the protocol, which is that happens quite a bit. And when we're on autopilot, we may just code LVI to 9. But the data item, a lymphovascular invasion, should be coded to 0. Lymphovascular invasion stated as not present. The preface and overview sections of the STOR manual are often overlooked. There's some great information in there. However, there are some valuable non-STOR resources which give us perspective on the 2018 transition year or another transition year, which is coming up, especially for 8th edition AJCC TNM staging and radiation treatment coding. There's also a list of links for the essential references and manuals for abstracting. This will guide the novice CTR as to what tools to use and when. So this is the hardest part, I think, for novice CTRs. We also should be aware of the overview of coding principles section of STOR, which provides specific instructions for coding primary site for the less prevalent diseases of heme lymphoid cancers, Kaposi's sarcoma, melanoma, and occult head and neck cancers, which is that new head and neck chapter. Primary site and multiple primary guidance is given for those less prevalent sites in a place we wouldn't expect. These directions give us an understanding of disease behavior for cancers we don't abstract very often. As I mentioned earlier, there is AJCC 8th edition TNM information within STOR's preface. Who would think, right? But we should also be aware there is also a more detailed AJCC section in the body of the STOR manual. This dedicated section can be found on page 192 of STOR, and that's page 229 of the PDF copy. So here on this slide, we have screenshots of this section. What we find are coding descriptions and instructions for the T suffix, which seem to be an area of confusion for many of us. From the table pictured in the lower right of this slide, we can appreciate that the M and S suffix for differentiated and anaplastic thyroid cancers means something different than for other tumors. STOR is essentially prompting us to look in a specified area of AJCC. So in this example, we're encouraged to visit the AJCC thyroid chapter for further information on the M and S suffix. The next resource for discussion is the solid tumor rules. Some basics for using the solid tumor rules include Step 1. Run each case through the rules unless the primary sites are obviously different. So we would find these directions in the general instructions. Like I was just saying, this is like policy and procedure manual. Step 2, stop at the first rule that applies. Step 3, document the M or H rule used when working with complex cases. Step 4, use the correct set of rules since not all sites were updated for 2018. Step 5, don't consider a physician's statement of recurrence when determining how many primaries to abstract. We should run our case through the multiple primary rules. And our last instruction for using the solid tumor rules, Step 6, we shouldn't consider metastatic tumors as a new primary since METS represents spread of disease. Now, as for working with the TNM 8th edition staging manual, here are some step-by-step instructions, some of which we've mentioned earlier. So step 1 is chapter 1. We should start with chapter 1 because it's important to read and it mimics general instructions in our other manuals. Now, step 2, we should proceed to the appropriate disease chapter for the site being abstracted. The next step, establish the staging time frame for the abstract so that we know if it's clinical, pathological, and post-therapy classifications. And then step 4, refer to the tables at the end of the disease chapter to assign the correct prognostic stage group. This is especially crucial for those primaries that require prognostic factors for generating final stage group, like breast. Now for some background and general pointers for using SEER Summary Stage 2018. What is summary stage? Well, it's the most basic way of categorizing how far a cancer has spread from its point of origin. How is it derived? Summary stage is a combination of the most precise clinical and pathological factors. Why is it used? Many central registries, including SEER, because hence the name SEER Summary Stage, they prefer summary stage in place of or in addition to HACC because it's broad enough to measure patient outcomes. Now, as far as user tips go, Appendix 1 of the SEER Summary Stage Manual contains resources for staging lymph nodes and lymph node chains. Understand and recognize the names of different structures and layers within the primary site, such as the GI layers of lamina propria, myometrium, and muscularis. This will help us avoid staging errors due to misinterpretation. So there's a lot of great illustrations in summary stage, and one of them being these layers for the GI tract. All right, some basics for using the SSDI manual are listed here on this slide. We should focus on selecting the correct schema first before searching for this SSDI data. Also, we shouldn't forget the SSDI manual contains guidance for assigning the correct schema discriminator, should there be one, for the site and histology we're abstracting. It's easy to rely on the automated features in our registry software to assign a schema discriminator, but when working with particularly complex cases, like esophagus or GE junction, the SSDI manual would be our primary source. Lab values and prognostic tests are a large part of SSDI coding, as we know. We'll need to check the rounding rules for each schema we're working with, since they differ across disease types. If we're having a hard time locating a lab value within the medical record, the SSDI manual may be able to help. We can check the site-specific section for the lab value or test in question. There may be an additional information heading and a source document subheading. If there is such a heading and subheading, we'll find a listing of common locations for source documents. For example, the intrahepatic bile duct chapter of the SSDI manual includes a source document list for locating fibrosis score in the medical record. So pictured here on the right of our slide is page 121 of the current SSDI manual. We see an additional information heading and a source document subheading, which lists the path report as the likely place to find the fibrosis score. Lab values can be tricky when recording SSDI data items. There's two things we need to consider. Are we working with a different lab value unit in the EMR that's not compatible with the SSDI manual? If so, is the lab value in question allowed to be converted? SSDI doesn't always allow for conversion in every situation, so it's important we consult the SSDI instructions to determine if conversion is allowed. So if we're permitted to convert a lab value, the SSDI manual provides guidance for conversion on pages 23 through 24. There's also reference to the American Medical Association's online conversion calculator, and we've provided the link on this slide here. All right, for ease in locating resources for primary site and histology coding, SEER's website provides a consolidated list. So a link to this list of tools for ICD-03 coding is provided at the top of the slide. We should also mention for accurate histology coding, we're instructed to utilize our manuals and resources in the following order. First, the solid tumor rules, then NACER's ICDO updates, then SEER Sync. We have questions or we want to search SEER Sync, ICD-03 manual, and to ask a SEER registrar. Next on our agenda is text documentation. What's the best way to approach text in the abstract? Let's consider this on the next few slides. Best practices for using abbreviations in our abstract include: avoid inventing abbreviations that only we know the meaning of. To ensure our abstract is concise and confirms all coded data, Long sentences aren't necessary. We may paraphrase and summarize instead. For example, a long-winded imaging report is often challenging to summarize. We can keep our text precise by only including clinical information relevant to the patient's cancer identification and stage. And the last tip for using text, keep information relevant to the current cancer. You see, we have a tendency to include secondary diagnoses or symptoms from an unrelated visit. A helpful tip, check your hospital and state registry manuals for any specific requirements. Now, let's look at how we approach the NACER abbreviation list on the next slide. On this slide, we've listed commonly used words within the medical record and their corresponding NACER abbreviation. These words were included in a typical physical exam text section, so your experience may be different depending on the site you're abstracting and the facility you're abstracting for. We recommend that you incorporate one commonly used word to a NACER abbreviation each week until you've memorized the abbreviation list from NACER, at least for your purposes, for the most commonly used words. So if we were to commit to memorizing one NACER abbreviation each week for a series of months, we'd be an expert in no time. Now, on the next slide, let's study an example of how text validates coded data. This is an example of what a standard setter may encounter when receiving cancer data from different reporting facilities. In the left column, we show how text validates the coded data from Hospital A. Yet in the right column for the records submitted by Hospital B, there's no text. So we have no way of knowing if the primary site is correct or if the abstractor accidentally transposed the ICD-03 topography code. Could this really be a second primary of the stomach, or was the patient seen at Hospital B for their newly diagnosed prostate cancer? It's the same histology, so that's where therein lies the problem. Because stomach can be adenocarcinoma and so can prostate. On the next page, we'll demonstrate how to properly support our coded data. Prostate pathology reports contain a lot of information, and it's often overwhelming. Here's an example of using too much of the pathology data in the pathology text section. We can see how hard it is to read this cluttered entry with abbreviations that only the abstractor is familiar with. Let's look at how we can make this a more concise picture on the next slide. Now, we have the same patient's pathology report information, but it's paraphrased now to include only the necessary information to assign the required SSDI codes. The prior example included information not relevant to our coding requirements for prostate cancer. So what we need to include in our text is the most extensive involvement of the tumor in terms of grade and pattern. So for this example, if there were two different codes reported in the path report, we would only include the highest grade and pattern in our text. We can see from this SSDI table pictured here on the right that the codes can be easily entered based on the revised pathology text. Now, on to the physical exam section. Here we have an example of lengthy physical exam text that's hard to follow. The purpose of physical exam text is to indicate why the patient presented to the reporting facility, as well as any relevant physical exam findings that will contribute to your clinical staging. This is also the section where your hospital may ask for facility-specific preferences such as social history, family cancer history, and comorbidities affecting when treatment can start. An abstracting tip, avoid duplicating information within the physical exam text that has its own dedicated section. So for example, we shouldn't include X-ray or scan results in the physical exam section because they have their own section. If we have a good physical exam text, we should be able to answer these questions. Why did the patient first present to our facility, and what in terms of diagnosis and treatment was planned? Now, let's see how we can make this entry more concise. NCRA's informational abstracts recommend we include the following items in the physical exam text section. As far as demographics, the age, sex, and race, and for chief complaint, the reason the patient is seeking care at the reporting facility, And then physical exam findings, anything relevant to the primary tumor. And we should also note negative results. This will help us with staging. And then history, anything specific that the facility requires. We would add the personal and family cancer history and smoking and alcohol history, for example. So here's a better example. We have a date, actually. A lot of people don't think to put a date in their physical exam text, but it's really helpful. It kind of gives you some context, and so we've put this relevant encounter from a GI consult from January 8th, 2020, and here we have the age, sex, and race. And then we have the reason how this patient came to be, why they came and sought care at the, it's a little brief history. There was a sequel mass and liver lesions concerning for malignancy found on an outside scan. So the patient is now presenting to your facility for a diagnostic colonoscopy and further workup. And so we see here the physical exam findings are listed, and we're listing negative findings with no appreciable adenopathy, because that's going to help us stage the patient clinically. So we also have some history information here listed too. Family cancer history is non-contributory, and social history, such as smoking history, we've added. All right. We've also improved the physical exam text by using the proper abbreviations from the NACER abbreviation list. Okay, now let's consider ways to keep our abstracted data accurate and high quality. How do you determine the quality of a given set of information like cancer registry data? Well, there are 5 traits we should find within our abstracted data. Accuracy. Is the information correct in every detail? Completeness. How comprehensive is the information? Reliability. Does the information contradict other trusted resources? Relevance. Do you really need this information? And finally, timeliness. How up to date is the information? And can it be used for real-time reporting? Why do we need quality data? Well, it all comes back to the patient. We want to ensure the highest level of care. We can do that by providing accurate information for healthcare providers and researchers to analyze. As abstractors, we need to think about ways we're most productive, so our data collection process is a seamless experience. For example, if you know you work best with challenging cases at the start of your workday, then prioritize your assignment list accordingly. Also, take advantage of user features if your electronic medical record offers them. For example, your medical record may offer a search feature where a keyword can be plugged in to help locate missing data. Another strategy is to work through the medical record one section at a time in the order the abstract is organized. This may not be possible for the medical record you're working with. If not, we may opt to take notes as the EMR is being reviewed for reference later on. This will prevent us from jumping around the registry software while abstracting. QA review by another abstractor or a manager is common, but should we incorporate self-review into the initial abstracting process? Let's take a look. Let's see. What are the advantages of self-review? Well, assessing our work ourselves helps us become more efficient. It sounds counterintuitive, but ultimately our abstracts will be touched less if we review our own work for common inconsistencies. We're all human and we're working with a lot of data in different locations. So connecting the dots requires more than one look at the abstract. What we mean is work through an abstract and then set it aside to gain some perspective. The next day or later in the day, we can revisit our completed abstracts and make corrections to common small errors. Self-review is also a learning opportunity. We can pinpoint common errors and prevent them from happening in the future. Self-review also allows us to be more proactive. Once we look at the quality of our own data, we can answer these questions ourselves. Are we abstracting at the right pace? Are we interpreting the data collection guidelines correctly? Do we need to ask for help or clarification from the treating physician or a supervisor? On the next slide, we'll explore a typical step-by-step process for effective self-review. What do we normally do when abstracting a case initially? Here are some recommended steps. Step 1, we abstract all our assigned cases for the day. Step 2, at the conclusion of our day, we skim over each abstract to ensure the codes match our text and we've captured a concise patient story. Now, as mentioned earlier, we're all human, so there could be small errors that we uncover. Step 3, correct those errors and mark your abstract complete. Step 4, if there are still unresolved questions related to a rule or incomplete treatment, for instance, keep the abstract incomplete and revisit the following day or at the appropriate time when treatment information is received. Let's consider what we can accomplish with self-review. There's a good chance we'll remember missing pieces to the puzzle after the fact. In other words, we may recall something we forgot to incorporate in the abstract initially. A second look also affords us a broader view of the patient's story by taking a less focused look. We're zooming out in essence. Okay, that's the conclusion of my talk. We've explored the best approaches for high quality abstracted data, and we discussed the best ways to utilize our manuals and resources. We then devised a strategy for concise text documentation. And finally, we considered the advantages of self-review. Does anyone have any questions? I thank you for your time and attention today.
Thank you, Kim.
Sure.
That was awesome. Thank you. Got lots of notes I'm going to go back and research because we are busy and we always need that reassurance and those tips that you gave. So that was very informative. Thank you. Awesome.
All right. I'm glad it helped.
Let's see. Yeah. Excellent presentation, Kim. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Got chats coming in.
Okay.
Thank you, Kim. Lots of information. Let's see. Excellent. Thank you, Kim. Good information. Got a lot of things. Thank you. So.
Oh, good. Yeah, my goal was to make you a better abstractor. So hopefully we accomplish that. So.
Yeah, it's hard for us to put everything in one place to get to all our references. I think that's been a big challenge for my group. We recently went under a upgrade. Everybody got Windows 10, and so we no longer can have desktop.
Oh no.
Desktop shortcuts, as that's what they use. So they've had to be creative and put something on their OneDrive where they can click on the OneDrive and pull everything up. So it's so if anybody has Windows 10 that is VDI, VDM, you have any tips or tricks, we'd love to hear them.
Yeah, I have OneDrive too, and it took a little bit to get used to. Yeah, it was like, what? Why do I have to use OneDrive? Why can't I just use my C drive? And why can't? Yeah.
And not be able to have shortcuts on the desktop.
That's weird. I can have shortcuts. I don't know why you can't. Yeah.
They said for our remote abstractors, they can't have shortcuts.
Oh, okay. The VDI part of it. Okay.
Probably.
Yeah.
Great tips. If your hospital, let's see, we got some more stuff coming in. Great tips. If your hospital has less than ideal information, can the register request supervisor to ask for doctors to document better?
Yeah. I mean, and that's the biggest battle, like, because I work for Unthrive, right? And we don't usually have access to physicians. So by all means, if you can, if you got the ear of a doctor and say, hey, you know, they probably don't know their documentation is not that great, or, you know, they're just not aware. And I mean, you can make them aware of certain quality measures and make it a quality study too, if you want, you know.
I mean, if our hospital is involved with PQRS, no, what is it? PCO, it's some kind of oncology quality metric. So see if they're involved in that, because they should have quality measures that they have to document. But that's where our quality, I mean, our medical records are still not where we would like them to be, but they are better because they have certain items that they have to document, like fertility, staging, because they're involved in that. I think it's PQRS.
PCORI or is it
PCORI,
PCORI?
something like that. Yeah, it's an oncology quality thing that they're involved in.
Yeah.
And data is your biggest weapon, I guess you could say. If you can give them data and show them that their information is less than ideal, then that will speak millions.
Volumes, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you can track it too and say, you know, from here's how we've improved, and because we have this information now. And, yeah.
It's QOPI.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Anna.
COPI. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anna. I was having a brain fart, is what I call them.
There's so many acronyms now. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I got it done early. I had an hour, but
Yes, you did.
yeah.
It's been good.
Okay.
Great job. Very informative.
All right. Well, I'm going to sign off unless there's more questions.
Yep, we got more coming in.
Okay.
What do you think is the most common errors?
Most common errors. I think it depends on what you struggle with. Like I struggle with AJCC. Like it's so counterintuitive to me. I think that, and I think SSDIs right now are super hard, and until we familiarize ourselves with that, with the newer concepts, and radiation too. I mean, I think radiation is a uphill battle. I mean, until we get a summary like that, like the CAP protocol for radiation, it's like we're on our own, you know, trying to figure out. Yeah.
We get summaries, Kim, and they're still difficult.
Well, what they want to do, I think the COC wants to make like the standard form that every radiation oncologist needs to follow, but it's not yet done, or it's not even in the works, I guess. So
well, we're lucky. I mean, we use the Mosaic and it's in a table format, but it's still hard to code, especially your head and neck. I mean, when you've got a list this long, trying to figure out what phase 1, 2, and 3 is, and of course, you know, the education the other day was very informative from Wilson. So
I heard he was really good. Like I heard from somebody I work with that they thought it was great. So yeah,
it was. Any other questions? Come on, don't be shy.
Can you hear my leaf blower people? It's like a battle of the leaf blowers out there.
No, I don't hear them.
That's good.
No other questions that I can see. So we appreciate it, Kim. It was very informative. We hope to see you in person next year.
Yeah, I hope we have it in person next year. That's for sure.
Yep, back at Lake Blackshear.
Love that place.
Yeah, very beautiful. Very relaxing. So we're hoping we can meet in person next year. So.
All right. Well, thanks for inviting me.
Well, thank you for being part of us, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
What? What happened? Hold on, everybody. We've got, goodness, what happened? I'm having technical difficulties.